Good morning, and welcome to the Museum of the San Ramon Valley's virtual speaker series. I am Dan Dunn, the director of the museum. Last month, Eric Fraser Hayes told us how the influences of place affected the works of playwright Eugene O'Neill. We have touched upon place in many of the programs in this series, the Sunol Water Temple and the old San Francisco Mint Building being among them. Today, noted Oakland historian and award-winning author Dennis Evanowski will tell us the story of Lake Merritt. It's a prominent and vibrant place in the city of Oakland. On a sunny day, there are festivals, bikers, picnickers, and runners. But what do we know about the lake? Is it natural, man-made? And where did the name Merritt come from? Also, what role has it played in the development of Oakland? We have a good storyteller for us today. Dennis has been a docent at the Mountain View Cemetery, the Pardee Home Museum, and has led walking tours of the Preservation Park, Lake Merritt, the Oakland Estuary, the Laurel District, and he currently leads walking tours for the Alameda Post about the city's history. Dennis is the editor of the Alameda Post's nonprofit newsletter. He is a freelance writer with 12 published books to his credit. He has edited the Alameda County Historical Society's newsletter for 10 years and Oakland Heritage Alliance's quarterly for 2. He has received 4 Partners in Preservation Awards from the Oakland Heritage Alliance. Please use the chat window at the bottom of the screen if you have any questions during this presentation. Feel free to send in your questions at any time, and we'll address them at the end. And now it's my great pleasure to welcome Dennis Evanowski. Dennis?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Gotcha.
Okay. Thanks very much, Dan, for that great introduction. I appreciate it very much. Welcome, everybody. I'd like you to sit back and enjoy my favorite thing in my favorite town in the whole world, which is Lake Merritt. And on the left side of the introductory screen, you can see the lake itself. It has 2 branches because it's fed by 2 freshwater sources on each of the branches. If you look really close, you can see the silt pouring in on each of the branches there by creeks flowing out of the Oakland Hills to the left out into the area around Mountain View Cemetery, and to the right along around the area around Trestle Glen. And it's really not a lake at all. And you can notice here it's being fed by a channel, and we call it the channel. And that channel has been quite stifled by construction. And I can show you what I'm talking about here by showing you a slide, but as I always do, I always want to take my hat off to a great unknown hero, an unsung hero, Mayor Melvin Chapman, who acquired the lake from the Southern Pacific Railroad for the city. And it's hard to believe that the lake once belonged to the city. Not only the lake, but the entire estuary belonged to the railroad, thanks to the cunning man on the top left corner, the man everybody loves to hate, Horace Carpentier, and his 2 friends next to him, Collis Huntington, who had the purse strings for the railroad, and Leland Stanford, who drove the idea of bringing the Transcontinental Railroad into the East Bay rather than into San Francisco. In 1885, the Central Pacific Railroad was devoured by the Southern Pacific Railroad, and then they had the South Pacific Coast Railroad for dessert. And they needed a bigger station, and they decided that they were going to cover over Lake Merritt, and they were going to make a big train station there. And thanks to Mr. Chapman and his knowledge as a lawyer, he saved the lake from the hands of the railroad. Now, if you look at this map, you can see the estuary in its entirety. On the far left side, the water is running from the San Francisco Bay through Oakland and then down into that channel I talked about, which as you can see is much wider, and then up into Lake Merritt, when you can see somewhat obscurely some of the streams, especially Indian Creek that's feeding the lake up here and up on the far right. And then some of the water is forced and it flows into what we now call the Brooklyn Basin. And you can see the town of Brooklyn there. The town of Brooklyn is named for the ship that carried the Mormons here in 1847 or 1846. And there was a man who was on that ship. Later, he was one of the equivalent of a county supervisor. And he decided to name the town, the township, and the basin all after the ship that carried him here with all the rest of the Mormons. And by the way, when the Mormons showed up in 1847, they doubled the population of the city of San Francisco, and they bought a printing press along with them. So it really made a difference in how San Francisco thrived. But again, have a look here at the entire estuary. Later on, there would be a tidal canal that would be built across to join this estuary to San Leandro Bay. And here, oops, sorry. Here's a closer look of that map I just shared with you. You can see Glen Echo Creek, which was really called Cemetery Creek. But after all, we can't have a cemetery creek running through the affluent neighborhood, so they changed the name to Glen Echo Creek. And what's really surprising is Oakland's first and second cemeteries were along the lake. And you can see the arrows there where the first cemetery was opened in 1850 and closed in 1855. And the second cemetery opened in 1855 and then closed in 1864 when they opened Mountain View Cemetery. And they moved all the bodies to Mountain View Cemetery, all the ones that they could. They continue, by the way, to find bodies there. And the keystone to this story, the entire story of Lake Merritt, is that 12th Street Bridge you see there. The county intended to build a bridge, and they couldn't get it done. And our friend Horace Carpentier stepped in and built the bridge for them. And they called it the Bridge of Sighs because Horace decided to charge exorbitant fees to get across the bridge. Here's the man, Thomas Eager. He's the one who came aboard the ship, the Brooklyn, and named every place he could Brooklyn after that ship. We also have the little town of Clinton and the little town of San Antonio, just to the right of the word Brooklyn there. And Clinton and San Antonio were both little towns founded before the county took over. And then these were all taken into, as they still are today, the city of Oakland. The arrow points to the bridge, and there you see a picture of the Brooklyn as she's sailing the seas. Jeremiah Whipter in 1860, we can see some growth here, but we can also see, interestingly enough, it's called San Antonio Creek. San Antonio was a name that the Spanish gave our entire area here when they mapped the area at first in 1776. And for some reason, they picked the name San Antonio, and they named the creek San Antonio. There's also the little town of San Antonio that I already mentioned. And my black arrow there is pointing to the bridge, which is completely necessary to get people over into the town of Brooklyn. You can see they snuck the name Brooklyn into the bridge over there so people could see where exactly that bridge was going to. And here's the Bridge of Sighs, the name that everybody gave, that everybody would sigh. I think it was more cursing than sighing, actually, when they found out how expensive the tolls were to get across the bridge. And very importantly, over to the left, you see the College Block. This is the home of the beginning of the University of California, Berkeley, the College of California. And they started the school there in the 1850s. At first they were in a Fandango Hall, and they were given this block to start their school. And very interesting enough, as I already mentioned, if you look further up the hill there, you can see the cemetery along one of the branches of Lake Merritt there. That's the second cemetery there. The third cemetery isn't marked on this map, but it's down just below the 12th Street Bridge. And by the way, when they built Mountain View Cemetery, they thought it was going to be very safe because it was way away from where anybody would ever come. That's how far away they thought it was. Of course, that it didn't work out that way.
Dennis?
And yes.
Can we get you to push the green button in the upper left corner? Your presentation is filling up our screen.
You got it.
Desktop on the
You
very
got it.
top, green there button. Do that.
You got it.
That should enlarge it. Enter full screen or,
It says new share.
no, upper left, the green button. We're seeing your
Okay.
desktop.
Is that it?
No. There we go. There we go.
All right, good. Sorry. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, this is a lot better. Thank you very much. I didn't realize that was happening. Here's our man, Samuel Merritt, and he built a house, which I'm going to show you where it is in just a moment. This house stood up on what is now Jackson Street. At the time, it was just a dirt road in front of his house, but later became Jackson Street. Samuel Merritt, Oakland's mayor in 1868, a medical doctor who did a lot for the city by instituting a lot of laws to keep disease down. My two favorite ones is he limited the amount of dung that would be allowed in the horse stables. How high the piles of dung could go, and he did the same thing in the oyster stores. The oyster shops where you would enjoy having oysters. He limited that. On the bottom left of the picture is the Casco, his ship named for his hometown in Maine. And this ship plays an important role in the life of Robert Louis Stevenson, because Robert Louis Stevenson got the ship from Merritt, and it took him down to the South Seas where he passed away. And so you have this wonderful tie, Robert Louis Stevenson's tie to Samuel Merritt, and of course Samuel Merritt's tie to the lake. And Merritt was the one who he forbade any kind of wildlife hunting on the lake, all the fowl, any fishing, anything like that. By the way, there were salmon in the lake at one time, and they tied this into later on making Lake Merritt the first refuge, wildlife refuge. And it started with Samuel Merritt idea to prohibit hunting along what later became his lake, Lake Merritt. Wonderful picture. We know that this is totally correct in detail because Joseph Lee was a painter who was famous for painting ships. If you had a ship built, and one of the things you would do was you would have Joseph Lee paint a picture of your ship, and many of the ship owners said they would remark they could rig their ships based on Joseph Lee's painting. It was so accurate. This is the very first 12th Street Bridge. And you can see it's somewhat flimsy. Lee chose to put a stagecoach in the middle of the bridge and put a horse and carriage on the other, and people fishing and rowing their boats and people watching and all this other kind of thing. But up on the hill, crowning the entire picture, is Samuel Merritt's home. Merritt did pay Lee to paint this picture of his home. This is a huge picture. I forget how big it is. I had the opportunity to see this one time, the privilege of seeing this one time. I think it's like 3 feet wide and 1.5 feet tall or something like that. But very, very big and very, very impressive job by Joseph Lee. Brooklyn, across the way, begins to develop. And you can see all the industry along the Brooklyn shoreline. This is, we're standing on the Oakland side. This is the second bridge now. We're standing on the Oakland side of the second bridge. The first bridge was built, which I talked about earlier, in 1852, 53. This was the 1870 bridge. And you can see how much sturdier this bridge is. And off in the distance, on the back of that smokestack, is the Tubbs Hotel. Hiram Tubbs came here with his brothers, invited his father over, who owned a hotel on the East Coast. And he had so much money, he opened up this hotel and gave it to his father as a present to run. So the Tubbs Hotel is there. And by the way, all these paintings at this time always had to show smoke coming out of smokestacks. And you can see the mandatory chimney with the smokestack coming out there on the left-hand side. So this is the 1870s bridge. And then we have a later bridge. And you can see here what they've done is they've actually dammed up the lake. And this is probably around 1890. There's one of Tubbs's horse car lines going across, taking people to his hotel and beyond. And my favorite thing in this picture is the ad for Trapper's Oil. And notice it says Trapper's Oil, period. And then on the screen, I decided to research. I have to know everything about all my stuff. So I found out what Trapper's Oil does. And you can see it cured rheumatism, neuralgia, stiff joints, contracted joints, bruises, burns, and scalds, diarrhea, dysentery, pains in the stomach and bowels, and all aches and pains. and as did all the other interesting stuff that you would find on a druggist shelf. So here's a picture here. On the left-hand side, there's a building that belonged to the Cameron Stanford House. And they're very interesting on the left-hand shore here, on the western shore of Lake Merritt. It was full of mansions, and they passed a law taking the shoreline away from them, and the rich people all moved away when they lost their shoreline. Here's Hiram Tubbs with his hotel and his spacious home, which was right across the street. Very, very, very impressive. Built it in 1870, right in tune with when that bridge was built. And then the hotel, as did all wooden hotels everywhere, this hotel burned in an 1893 fire. Tubbs had plenty of money. He's the one who he owned this cordage. You can see the detail of it there. That's a rope walk where he's making the huge used rope for the ships. And this is my favorite picture of San Francisco. There's a lighthouse there, and that bump in the picture is Rincon Hill, and then further up to the left is Mission Bay, which is now all covered over, unfortunately. But you can see Hiram Tubbs's cordage, and this is easy to find even nowadays, because if you go to the stadium and just go south of the stadium, you'll find a street named for Tubbs, and that's where his cordage works were. And if you go to the Hyde Pier, they haul one of his buildings over to Hyde Pier. You can go to Hyde Pier and see his pictures, see his one of the buildings that was there as well. Here's the beginning of the University of California campus. 1855, it moved here, and they finally had enough money to build two nice buildings. School started here and lasted here until 1868, when they opened the college campus in Berkeley, and they all marched away by foot. They had a big procession out to Berkeley, and all the students went out there. There would not have been, in my opinion, a liberal arts school at the College of California, at the University of California, Berkeley rather, in the form that it took without this school. This was the liberal arts school that just simply moved itself onto the University of California, Berkeley campus. And when they moved, you can see the beautiful building there off on its own in the yard. And then you can see eventually by 1892, it's now being used as a stables. And it was enlarged and used as a stables. And that is Harrison Street. The road in front of it running away from us is 12th Street. And you can see 12th Street wasn't even in the picture before 1868. But it's interesting to see what they did to these buildings. They took this one and they used it as a horse stable, and they took the other one and enlarged it. This is Brayton Hall, a name for Isaac Brayton, by the way, the man who Isaac Brayton and Mountain View Cemetery saved this place because they were going to close it. They ran out of money. Isaac Brayton had a piece of property that he sold to the cemetery people, $3,000 in gold coin, $10,000 in bonds for the cemetery, and he took $1,000 of his gold coins and invested it back in the college, and the college was able to stay open. So I always like to point out that Mountain View Cemetery saved the College of California, which in turn saved the UC Berkeley. So I always, once a year, I give a tour to the Berkeley people, and I always tell them the story about how Mountain View Cemetery saved the Cal campus. And you can see at the bottom here, both buildings in the distance. There's the other building, which is now very clearly cut 12th Street. And then another one is Samuel Merritt stepped in here, and also on 12th Street, he built this Grand Central Hotel, and it's very grand indeed. And as a newspaper person, I always like to tell a story about how the Oakland Tribune was born at the bar in this place. All the three men who started the Oakland Tribune signed the contract and put their money on the table at a bar in this place, as it did, as the Tubbs Hotel did. This one was destroyed by a fire in a kitchen in the middle of the night, 2:30 in the morning. The fire started. The fire companies couldn't get there. A lot of these folks, Merritt, one of them, didn't really believe in fire hydrants. And unfortunately, they had to sit back and watch this building burn because the fire hydrants were lacking. And they for a long time after this, 12th Street was named Central Avenue for the hotel. And then when the hotel went away, it didn't make any sense anymore. Anthony Chabot lived on the lake in this beautiful house right where 18th Street hits the lake. The house is now gone. And he's the one who paid for the telescope and some of the building of the Chabot Observatory, which you see here, which sat downtown very near the Pardee home. It was in downtown Oakland for quite some time. Then it moved up to Leona Heights, and then finally now it's sitting further up in the hill, up in the Oakland Hills, where there's less and less light. They moved it out of here because of the light. And Tubbs is the water man, the water king. He's the one who figured out, let's get all these water companies together, and then we'll finally get everybody to drink safe, clean water. Lake Chabot was named for him. Lake Chabot was built for the purpose of securing the water, and that lake is named for him. One of my great discoveries, if I could mind patting myself on the back here, nobody really knew about this, that there was an auto row. At first, everybody knows about the auto row, or did at one time, the auto row in Oakland, which was on Broadway. Well, there was also an auto row near Lake Merritt on 12th Street. When the automobile became fanciful and when it came time to selling automobiles, you can see some of them on Broadway, some of them on 12th. The left-hand side's cut off because I couldn't open the book far enough. And it was a 150-year-old book, so we didn't want to fool with it too much. But you can see the Studebaker Brothers has a shop there at the corner of 12th and Jackson, and all the Locomobile, my favorite name for a car of America, had a shop at 12th and Harrison. And you can see on the top here, the person whose shop this belonged to, Henry Hampel, he had a carriage factory, and he's showing off his wares by sticking one of the carriage that he manufactured on the roof, so you could see what he could do. More of Auto Row here. All the automobile businesses on 12th Street, they eventually moved over to Broadway, and this 12th Street was forgotten. This 12th Street Auto Row was forgotten until one day I was, in my father's word, fiddle farting around with the directories at the Oakland Museum, and we came across all these cars on 12th Street. There's only one left, just one left, and that's all. There's some more of them. Hampel's brother, by the way, also had a bakery. He's over on East 12th Street, which is it says East Oakland, but that used to be called Brooklyn. So you can see here, Brooklyn was gobbled up by Oakland. And now suddenly Brooklyn is not called Brooklyn anymore. It's called East 12th Street. This is the three Hampel sons did very well for themselves. A bakery, a carriage dealer, and then a large farm in Glenview, and up in Glenview we have Hampel Street, which remembers John Hampel, who had the farm there. And suddenly, beauty comes, depending on your taste, I guess, in the form of something called the City Beautiful movement. And it was born in Chicago at the Columbian Exposition in 1893. By the way, Columbus discovered America in 1492, and they were supposed to have this thing in 1892, but they were too slow getting done. So they had to open it in 1893. This huge movement called the Beaux-Arts style took hold nearly everywhere, and Oakland had a pile of money they needed to spend because they had taken over a lot of the villages in 1908, and they did something like this, and this is still there. Everybody calls it the Lake Merritt Tierra. It's just there. It's a beautiful place to stop. And nowadays, when you go there, there's a sidewalk on the right-hand side in Boston bronze that shows you, that has the names of all the creeks that flow in, and it's quite a nice place to spend Saturday because there's also a farmers market there. But this is the Embarcadero, Oakland's Tierra, on the far northern shore of Lake Merritt. On the eastern shore of Lake Merritt, they built the 18th Street Pier. It's also still there, very near where Merritt's, where the Water King's Chabot's house once stood. And they still use this even for boating today. It fell into a decrepit repair one time, and they decided to, in 2012, they decided to put some money into all this and repair everything. The crown jewel of Oakland's the City Beautiful movement is, of course, a City Hall, which was built in 1911, and then the Metropolitan Auditorium built in 1914. Unfortunately, falling into disrepair to the point where the city doesn't want to spend any money on it. We're hoping we're going to have a new mayor here next year, and we're hoping we can get our new mayor, whoever that may be, to put some money back into what is now called the Henry Kaiser. Kaiser did sink some money in here, and Henry Kaiser was it was renamed for him. And another City Beautiful building that people tend to go by and not know what it is. It's the fire alarm building, and this is where all the fire alarm warnings went. In other words, you would pull a firebox somewhere in town, and it would route here, and it would show you here where the alarm was, and then they could alert the fire department. And then in 1983, they introduced the 9/11 Dispatch Center into Oakland, and they closed this building. And I've always wanted this building. When I win the lottery, I'm going to take this building and I'm going to put a museum dedicated to the city of Oakland in it, because the Oakland Museum of California is all about California. I want a museum that is dedicated only to Oakland, and I need the lottery numbers in order to be able to do it. Another City Beautiful building, the Boathouse, a great grand restaurant there now, a wonderful place to stop. One of the things we do here, I have this talk here is based on a 3.5 mile walk all around the lake. At the end of the walk, we start and stop at the Boathouse, and then we have lunch afterwards, or a late lunch, depending on how long it takes. This is another great idea of the Beaux-Arts movement, and in the distance, deliberately, you can see City Hall, and so there are two Beaux-Arts monuments here for us to enjoy, and all of the people standing out, getting ready to get on the boats for the day, posing for the photographer. Not too very far away, when the Lincoln Highway finally made it to Oakland, they put this hotel there. It's still there in all its beauty. Those beautiful spires are still there, and today it's being used as a senior housing. But this is another part. Walter Matthews, a very famous architect, and Bliss and Fauvel, who built our wonderful Green Library, the first library to be built with Carnegie's name. And this grand building still stands and is still being used as a senior center. And my three favorite houses of all, these beautiful Colonial Revival gems that sat across the Lake Merritt, and they took these buildings down in 1964, and they built this lake shore 1200 Lakeshore building right where the buildings are. It makes me cringe when I see this slide, because I think it's such a shame. But I have friends that live in the apartment there, and it's very, very, a very nice place to live. And finally, I'm proud to say I took this picture. They turned the necklace of lights back on in 1985. They turned them off in 1941 when they were afraid of Japanese attacks on the West Coast. So they turned the lights off. 4,000 lights, 3.4 miles of shoreline, and it lights up every night. And there's a beautiful pole in between holding the lights up, anchoring the lights, as you can see there. And the poles are all beautifully made, all paid for by patrons when it was built in 1925. And then to the left there, you can see the Tribune building, which the Tribune has gone out of the building, but the Tribune building is still there. And trying to sneak into the picture way in the back is Oakland City Hall. You can see just very dimly in the background there. That's City Hall, not lit bright enough for the camera to catch it. So now I want to end this with a suggestion. We have just up Grand from Lake Merritt, not even a block up Grand from Lake Merritt. There was an ice cream place called Dryers. It moved to College Avenue, and then it was gobbled up by a big national company, and it's no longer in Oakland. But there was Dryers, and next door there was a candy shop owned by a man named Edie, E-D-Y. And Dryers and Edie got together and they decided to throw stuff into ice cream to make it more sellable and more palatable. The first ones they did was peppermint. They took vanilla ice cream and threw peppermint shards into the ice cream. Then they came up with this idea of the walnuts and the mushrooms, and they called it Rocky Road because of the walnuts in there. But then at the same time, up on Piedmont Avenue, Fenton's claimed to invent the Rocky Road. And so there's a little contest, who did it first. So I want to stop here and leave you with some homework. If you get into Oakland, go up on Piedmont Avenue. It's the only place you can buy the Rocky Road, and then stop by a supermarket and decide which of the two ice creams tastes the better. I have my opinion, but I'm not going to let you know. So thank you very much.
Okay, so Dennis has thrown down the gauntlet. Your homework assignment is to figure out whether you like Dryers or Fenton's the best. And that's not a bad assignment. You know, Dennis, I complimented you before on the maps and the slides that you've chosen for us, and I just want to do it so that everybody can hear it. I think that was a great presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.
And so we've got some questions for you.
Okay.
And we need to go back to the beginnings because somebody wants us to clarify the origin of Lake Merritt, whether it is swampland that were fed by creeks or whether it was tidal.
It originally was marsh that was fed by creeks, and the marshland was taken away simply by fill. If you went back, let's say 1,000 years, you would find a marsh surrounding that entire body of water, which we call Lake Merritt, maybe 3 feet, maybe 4 feet on each side of the shoreline. And then you would find marshland going up to the north side, and you would find a creek that originally was called Indian Creek because it was there was a Ohlone tribe living in a valley further up the creek. And that was also all marsh. So originally it was marshland, and it's a slough, which is a tidal creek. It actually is a creek, and you can see how it was shaped. That, by the way, I don't know if I mentioned or not, but that map I showed with the whole thing, that was done in 1857 by the Geodesic Survey. That map is very accurately done, and that entire body of water. So the short answer is, it was a marshland, and it was a tidal creek with the marshland fed enough by the other creeks that it became a large body of water on its own.
Okay, so now let's talk about the man that everybody loves to hate. I have read independently about Carpentier, and he pretty consistently comes across as not a great guy.
No, he doesn't. And what's funny is you talk about him on the East Coast, and people cannot understand why everybody hates him, because they love him on the East Coast, because he took the money that he made from the land he stole from Oakland and founded some chairs at Columbia University, which was his alma mater, and spent a lot of money on good to make up for maybe the bad he did, but basically. What Carpentier did was he showed up with his two friends, and there was a little town of Contra Costa right at the foot of First and Broadway there, and little tiny town of Contra Costa. And he showed up with something from Sacramento and announced that you are now in the city of Oakland and we're in charge. And by the way, I own the entire estuary. And that entire estuary meant that everything you saw on that slide, he took over. Lake Merritt, Brooklyn Basin, and the waterway that ran in from San Francisco Bay. He took it all. And then the real short version is he and Leland Stanford got together with Collis Huntington, and the train needed a way to get out into Oakland, to get out to the Oakland Pier. And they decided, with much crookedness, that they were going to own the waterfront and what is called the tide lands. And the tide lands is simply the land that goes dry when the tide is out. and they ran the tracks along first for the commercial end of the deal. But then he takes his money and then he goes back east, and he's very kind and very nice and very gentle and all that. And they just can't understand why they hate him, but they hate him because the money he was giving away, he stole from us. So basically, that's probably the best way to put it.
Yeah, well, that sort of puts him in that category then.
Right.
You really liked the Joseph Lee picture of Merritt's house. You kind of raved about that one and the artist.
Right.
Where is that?
The picture right now is in private hands.
Okay.
And I was able, and I don't remember, I was driven there to see it. I was able, someone knows me, and I like history, and I like Lake Merritt. And after I gave the walk around Lake Merritt, they knew the person who owned the picture, and they took me out to see it, and they had it stored away. They had to take it out. It's too big. In a normal house, it's too big to hang up anywhere. It just takes over the room. So they had it stored away, and they took it out of storage for me to see. And then they gave me a postcard with it, and that's the picture I use there. But you should just, if you ever get a chance, just Google Joseph Lee artist and wait until you see what he's done. It's absolutely amazing.
Yeah, it's funny. You can do all that stuff now.
Right now, right? Exactly.
Yeah. So, can you talk about the unearthing of the old 12th Street Bridge?
Yeah, we were very excited about this because we wanted to see if they could find the redwood pilings for the first two bridges. We know that they were made of redwood, and I was fortunate enough, this is one good thing about 1200 Lakeshore, I was fortunate enough to have a very good friend who lived on like the 18th floor, and he filmed the entire building of, or let's say revamping and rebuilding of the southern shore of the lake. The southern shore of the lake used to have 12 lanes of traffic in that dam. They bought the 12 lanes of traffic down to 4. And they took part of that and they turned it into a beautiful little park on the shore of Lake Merritt. And they took the old bridgeway, which was blocking the channel, and put a new bridge in, just a footbridge. And then there was another bridge further down on 8th Street, and they took that bridge away. And now the channel is flowing freely. And when they got to where the bridge, where they were finally down to where we thought the pilings were, we talked to the folks in charge of the bridge, and they said, when you find the pilings, would you please get a hold of us and let us know? And they did. And we went out, and there were the 8 pilings sitting there, but they weren't redwood. And so unfortunately, what they did was when they built the bridge, and we think it was the 1893 bridge, when they built that bridge, they took the redwood pilings away and disposed of them somewhere. We were hoping to find one of Horace Carpentier's pilings, but unfortunately, they weren't. I don't even remember. I was so disappointed. I don't remember what kind of wood it was, but it wasn't redwood. That's all I remember.
That is too bad.
Right. It is. Yeah.
So, question about Holy Name College. When was it built and where?
It showed up on Lake Merritt from San Francisco. I want to say, I don't have the date exactly in my head, but I want to say it's around 1900 they came. It might have been earlier than that. The question is answered by when did they come and when did they finally institute themselves as Holy Names College? And there's two. The answer to the first one is sometime in the 1870s, the nuns came, and then the school, I believe, was actually founded officially in like 1907, something like that. And then they stayed there until the 1980s, and they moved up. They had 7 acres there, and they couldn't expand. And Henry Kaiser wanted that space for one of his buildings, for the aluminum building. And so he arranged for the nuns to get a 33-acre piece of property up in the Oakland Hills above the Laurel District. But the answer is when they started it depends on when. I think they were chartered like in 1907, but they had been there since the nuns had been there since, a school had been there with the nuns since like 1870, something like that.
Okay. There's another question about the lake itself. we have somebody that wrote in that when they were a child, they remember playing in a riverboat or playing on a riverboat.
Yeah.
There was a channel between the estuary and the lake.
Yes.
What do you know about that?
The channel was eventually tightened up, I call it, by the city allowing developers to use to deposit fill there from other construction sites. So the channel that a lot of people remember was much wider than it is now. You can't picture a big boat going up there anymore, but at one time it could. And I only know one date, and it was 1933, and they were building the big courthouse on Lake Merritt. There's Alameda County has its court. Oakland is Alameda, the seat of Alameda County, and Alameda County's courthouse is the big, huge, beautiful building on the lake there. And when they were building that, they moved some of the dirt over. And started tightening that channel up, and that was the end of the idea of being able to do what your listeners remember doing. So sometime in the 30s, it stopped because they filled it in and tightened it up.
So speaking of big, beautiful buildings, the question about the fire building comes up, and unfortunately for you, no lottery numbers, but they're asking about. Where is the fire building and what is it used for now?
The fire building is closed and is sitting there. Nobody's using it for anything. And the fire building is just, let's say, this part of the talk didn't allow me to talk about the Cameron Stanford House, the only mansion left on the lake. And the fire building is very, very near the Cameron Stanford House, just down the street from the Cameron Stanford House.
So let's stay on the Cameron Stanford House, because we have another question about that.
Okay.
So feel free to go on that one for a bit.
The thing with the Cameron Stanford House, it was built by, I forget the gentleman's first name, but his name was Cameron, no E. I always love sometimes when I write about the Cameron Stanford House and people correct my spelling. It's Camron. That's how he spelled his name, and he built that home for his wife. And stayed there for quite some time. And darn it, I left my book home. I meant to bring my Mountain View Cemetery book that I wrote with me, because what's interesting that I stumbled on about the Cameron Stanford House was every family that ever lived in that house is lived in that house is buried at Mountain View Cemetery. So each of them in order has a pair of pages dedicated to them. I can't name them off anymore. Leland Stanford, Josiah Stanford, Leland Stanford's brother was one of them, I remember. And that house was lived in until the last family sold it to the city, and the city used it for the museum for the city of Oakland. And then they opened the big museum across the street, and they closed that house for a while, and then they opened it again. And fortunately, they were able to remodel it and put it back pretty much the way they think that, let's say, Leland Stanford or Josiah Stanford rather would have enjoyed it. And so it's a museum today. But essentially, the long and the short of it was built around 1868 by the Cameron family, and then 4 prominent families lived into it till it was finally turned over to the city of Oakland, and now it's a museum and a wonderful place to stop. There's 2 home museums really worth visiting. One is the Cameron Stanford House, and not too very, very far away is the Peralta House. So we have the Peralta Villa and the Cameron Stanford House, both standing from about that same period of time, built in the 1860s.
Okay. St. Mary Cemetery, and when was that built?
St. Mary Cemetery was opened in 1863 on just 2 acres of land. And that cemetery is right next to Mountain View Cemetery. And Mountain View Cemetery was opened in 1864, the following year. And Mountain View Cemetery is the one where they consolidated the two cemeteries I talked about in my talk. They bought everybody they could up to Mountain View. Some marked, some unmarked, some were put in a stranger spot. But St. Mary's St. Mary's is a Catholic cemetery, opened in 1863. Nowadays, it's probably I'm going to guess and say 150 acres, but when they first opened, it was only 2 acres. So
Okay. Diamond Creek came up as a question.
okay.
Somebody wrote in that it's they remember it being around Fruitvale, and
Right.
they asked the question, "What do we know about Diamond Creek?"
There's no Diamond Creek. There's Sousal Creek. The Sousal Creek runs from the Oakland Hills through the Diamond District and down, and it runs into the Oakland Estuary now, right by the Fruitvale Bridge. So there's no Diamond Creek. The creek is called Sousal Creek. Sousal meaning willow, and if you were to go to where the BART station is now, there was a very big grove of willow trees that creek flowed through, and then before they put the estuary in, Sousal Creek flowed until it met Oakland, before it met where Alameda is, and something got in the way, and it made this very, very strong right-hand turn and flows into San Leandro Bay, excuse me, San Leandro Creek. When you look at the early maps, it's interesting because they call it Brickyard Slough, because at first a guy named Romby was building bricks out of the marshland up near where Mandana is, Mandana and Lakeshore, in that area up there. And he ran out of material there, so he moved down to where he knew there was more good material, which is where Sousal Creek is. But Sousal Creek does not flow into Lake Merritt. Rather, there's a hill in the way, and it forces the creek to flow east, and then it flows into and feeds San Leandro Bay.
Okay. We got time for 2 more, I think. And one of them is the origin of Pill Hill.
Pill Hill is called Pill Hill because it was originally, and still is, at first a hill with doctors' offices on it. Now it's where all the hospitals are. Samuel Merritt has a hospital there, and there's other hospitals there. So because all the doctors' offices were there, people started calling it Pill Hill. Before that, it had another interesting name. I can't remember exactly. I want to say Blackstone. There were a lot of lawyers' offices there, and the lawyers' offices used this reference book. I think it was called Blackstone, and they called it Blackstone Hill because all the lawyers were there. But Pill Hill is there because all you got to do is drive up 30th and Broadway and go on to Pill Hill. Make any right you want, and you have all the hospitals there. But when the name originated, it was a bunch of doctors' offices.
Okay. So the Dennis Evanowski fan club has checked in, and they want to know, what do you do in your next walking tour of Berkeley?
Berkeley, right now, it's hard to say because I was doing it for the Berkeley historical people. And they're more than welcome to call the cemetery, tell them they want a tour, and I'm happy to do it, because what happened now that because of COVID, they stopped the tours. But for example, this year I've given 4 tours about Frederick Law Olmsted, and particularly only about him and his son, because this is the 200th year of Olmsted's birth. And the reason I say that is people were calling in asking for me to give the Olmsted tour. So if they call the cemetery and say, I'd like Dennis to give a tour about Berkeley, I'm happy to do it. It'll take a phone call. We need permission. And here's the other thing they got to know. Wednesday, Saturday, Sunday, that is it. The cemetery is closed all the other days of the week.
All right. And then since we're close to the holiday, any good haunted Oakland stories that you can relate?
There is my favorite one, and it's the Party Home Museum. And my favorite story is, and it gives me chills just to even tell it. One time I gave a tour there. I had lost my keys somewhere in the house. I had to lock the house. I didn't have the key to do it. I would have to call one of the dozens. I couldn't drive my car, so would have to do the most embarrassing thing ever is call my wife and tell her to come and get me. And, this is true. I walked through the house slowly 3 times and could not find my keys. The 3rd time through, I looked down on the floor in the dining room, and not only were my keys clearly on the floor, but there was a ray of sunlight shining on the keys.
Wow.
And I got the total creeps. And I'm
Yeah.
getting them now telling the story. And one other time, very briefly, we were getting a tour upstairs from one bedroom to the other, and there's a hall closet that you take from one bedroom to the other. And while I'm getting a tour in one room, the hall closet didn't close, it slammed shut. So they're there at the party home.
Okay.
And they're watching, and I think it's the sisters, the two sisters who lived there all their lives, and the sisters are watching.
Well, at least one of them seems to be helpful between.
Well, I mean, well, you know, the theory is they weren't helping me; they were getting me out of the house. They were tired of me. They were tired of me. Like, get him out of here.
Hey, Dennis, this was fun.
I'm glad. Thank you.
Thank you for coming on and
Thank you.
answering all of our questions. And
You're welcome.
as I said, your slides and maps were terrific.
Thank
Good
you.
storytelling.
Thank you.
So yeah, I had a blast.
Thank you. I'm glad. Thank you. Thanks everybody for coming aboard.
Okay. So I'd like to thank everybody from my point of view for viewing this morning. If you missed any of our earlier programs, you can find them by visiting the museum's website at museumsrv.org. We did have a question about this earlier. Today's program will appear early next week. Join us on Thursday, November 17th at 11:30. Most residents of the East Bay have heard of the town of Canyon, but very few know where it's located or anything about its rich history. Join Liam Donahue, on Thursday, November 17th at 11:30. He is the host and producer of East Bay Yesterday podcast and the co-creator of Long Lost Oakland, and he will tell us the story of Canyon. If you like these programs and want them to continue, we ask that you make a donation by going to the museum's homepage, museumsrv.org, and clicking on the Donate Now button. We are also in need of volunteers, and if you can give us some time, please contact the museum. I hope you enjoyed today's presentation. You have homework to do, dryers or Fentons. Stay safe, and thank you for watching.